Hello everyone, George Christie here with the Wine Industry Network, and I'd like to welcome you all to the inaugural Wine Industry Sales Symposium. Now, this conference began in May of 2019, originally as the three-tier wine symposium, which was focused exclusively on helping wineries better navigate their way through and just find more success in the wholesale channel. The 2020 conference was originally scheduled for May, and then as a result of COVID, postponed to September, but like many in-person events, we had to cancel. However, we felt the topic was just too important to cancel the conference completely, so we made the decision to create a virtual version and offer it free to the entire wine industry. At the same time, we seized the opportunity to layer on an additional day dedicated to the direct-to-consumer channel called Direct 2, or D2. D2 was something we had originally planned to introduce in the spring of 2021, but again, given the circumstances and the impact that COVID has had on wine sales, we felt compelled to launch it this year. What we have in store for you are 6 sessions over the next 2 days dedicated exclusively to sales. Day 1 will be focused on the wholesale channel, which will basically be our 3-tier symposium day. We'll cover topics ranging from state of the wholesale channel, an overview of distributor news, along with some of the technology and tactics wineries are adopting, some of which are here to stay. The day concludes with a panel comprised of distributors and brokers sharing their insights into best practices that they've witnessed, along with recommendations for wineries looking to finish the year strong and kick off 2021 the right way. The second day is our Direct 2 or D2 day, focused on the direct consumer channel, where once again we'll feature 3 sessions. Topics will cover best practices, successful engagement strategies, tactics to help wineries become less reliant on tasting room visitors, along with an overview of the overall performance of the direct channel through the first half of the year. Every session throughout the 2 days features an incredible amount of talent, experience, expertise, and I encourage you to not only watch the sessions, but take advantage of the chat features, submit those questions, because our goal is to make this conference as interactive and as educational as we can. Now, the conference would not happen without the sponsors. I'd like to take a minute to thank and acknowledge each one of them, because they're the reason that we've been able to offer this free to the industry. Commerce 7, Copper Peak Logistics, Orion Wine Software, Outshinery, Queenie Wine Intelligence, the Digest of Wine and Spirits Law, The Good Company, Vin Expo New York, and Wine Shipping. Thank you guys so much for your support. Next, I'd like to introduce our 2 moderators for the conference. First, Laura Webb. Laura led last year's 3-tier wine symposium sessions, and we're thrilled to have her back with us again this year. Laura is the founder of Webb Brand Consulting and a partner at Okos Partners, with nearly 20 years of business management experience, working in strategy, marketing, and innovation within both the B2C and B2B sectors. For a decade, Laura led marketing strategy and execution for several branded portfolios, along with managing global innovation for Brown-Forman's $3 billion business. Laura, welcome back, and thanks for being with us again.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Quite a different sales landscape than what we had 18 months ago.
Sure is. It's hard to make heads or tails of it.
It's unbelievable, right? I mean, it's just so crazy. Our co-moderator this year is Eric Guerra. Eric was a speaker at last year's conference, and Eric brings 17 years of wine experience. He's led some of the industry's most iconic wineries and wine brands, including his recent wine venture, ReserveTastings.com, which is a direct-to-consumer private wine and music club. Eric, welcome.
Hey, George. Thank you so much, Laura. It's great to see you.
Good to see you.
And I'm actually kind of used to doing a lot of virtual meetings. For the last, 10 years of my career, I traveled around the country to distributors and retailers managing large sales and marketing teams. And we use this quite a bit. So this actually feels normal to me. I'd rather be in a winery doing it, but
Now, Eric also recently released a new book called When Great Wine Is Not Enough. Eric, I love the title. I completely buy in on that. And tell everybody a little bit about the book.
Well, it just from being able to manage some of the greatest brands, small brands, large brands, and just sitting in Sonoma, Napa, and San Ynez Valley, and all these great places, and seeing all these incredible brands and wineries. The first thing that I noticed, especially 17, 18 years ago when I came into the business, is that when someone comes into the business, it could be another wine company that's building a brand, or someone who has, wants their storybook winery. They always hire the winemaker. They always hire the architect to build a really cool gate and winery. And they never hire a sales and marketing person up front. Sometimes, you guys know, they don't hire them until well after the process, after they make the wine. So this book is basically a manifest or a cry out to say to everybody, whoever's thinking about building a brand online, which is very important now, or brick and mortar, or just a negotiant brand out in the wholesale channel, you got to start with a solid sales and marketing person, with a winemaker, with an architect, with a web design team, and that will make a huge amount of difference. So there you go. That's the Cliff Notes. So you don't need to read the book anymore, even though it's available on Amazon.
Well, we're going to make sure that everyone in the audience has a link to learn a little bit more about the book and how they can get it. But I want to share this with our audience. In the spirit of transparency, all of the sessions that you're going to be watching were recorded over the last couple of days. And we made a decision to do that. It's really a quality decision. We wanted to make sure that we delivered a quality product and took care of all of the editing and make sure that what we delivered was up to your expectations. And so I want to ask Laura and Eric a little bit about your thoughts on some of what you heard over the last couple of days and share that with our audience.
Yeah, it's been a really informative few days. We had some new speakers as well as a couple returning speakers who were really great quality and insights. You know, the big learnings that I heard, particularly from the distributor to the supplier perspective, was from a product standpoint, comfort and convenience is really of paramount importance, and that seems to be what retailers and consumers are gravitating to more than ever. But in terms of the relationship between suppliers and distributors and retailers and even the end consumer, we have this tremendous opportunity with just this format here, where the intimacy and some of the personal touch we're really able to build upon in a way that we weren't in our old world. We've always been an industry of relationships, right? And that's never been more true than now. But the way that we utilize technology to connect with our stakeholders, our end consumers, our retailers, and bring our brands to them is just, it's really wonderful to see how the industry is evolving and taking hold of this opportunity here. So I'm really excited, and there certainly was some sentiment that, you know, even once the smoke clears, so to speak, and COVID is behind us, some of these changes are here to stay for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, do you want to pile on to that?
Yeah, you know, I was incredibly surprised on the positive aspect of everything. I didn't expect it to be a Debbie Downer, but I was really surprised on how everybody was figuring out their kind of groove, their lane in the the vinyl record, if you will, and finding that things like doing virtual tastings, or as I mentioned, I traveled a lot to go to sales meetings. At 5 of them, I really didn't need to be there. There were like 20 minutes where you could do now 20 of them in a month virtually and have fun with it and new ways of working. I mean, I was with some mid-sized wineries, and the positive energy was incredible that they found that they could do things that they never thought they would do before, and they're absolutely going to do it. Let's say if travel opened up tomorrow and everything went away, they still would continue to do these things. I was so heartened to see the positive message, because there's a lot of our industry that's completely decimated, like the restaurant, the on-premise side. But to see the positive energy from the wineries, especially in the midst of the fires that were going on while we were doing some of this, was really was great. It was really excellent. And for anybody out there who's going to watch this, just to get your own kind of your own psyche up while you're watching this, it's uplifting. It's more inspirational than informational. I thought that was really great.
Well, that's great. Well, so those of you in the audience, stay tuned. We've got a terrific day ahead for you. Eric, thank you. Laura, you're going to be leading our first session, so I'm going to hand it off to you.
This session is sponsored by Orion Wine Software, a world-class cloud-based ERP for wineries built on Salesforce.
Okay, thanks, George. Up next, we're going to start off with the state of the wholesale channel. I have Dale Stratton and Jake Hageman here. Dale Stratton comes to us from a deep history in the wholesale industry and consumer insights within the beverage alcohol business. After 35 years working in this industry, most recently at Constellation Brands, where he's played roles in consumer shopper insights, market research, business analytics, and category management, Dale now owns his own consulting firm. we're really excited to have him here with his long history and perspective. We also have Jake Hegman, who comes to us from the WSWA. He's a VP of Legal and Regulatory Affairs and works with wholesalers around the US on policy and compliance issues. Jake will be talking about some of that regulatory environment and changes that have occurred as a result of COVID and changes that we can expect to see on the horizon. As always, please submit your questions in the chat box. We won't be able to answer all of them, but we will have time at the end of the session, as well as following the session, to respond to more of your questions. So we look forward to that. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Dale Stratton.
Thank you very much. To start off, let's talk a little bit about SipSource. And for those of you who are not familiar with SipSource, SipSource is a very unique data set that is an aggregated total of wine and spirits distributor depletions. You can see the participating distributors on there, and when you see those names, you understand the breadth of this data. With over 328,000 accounts supplying data for this, it really is a very, very robust data set. That data is then aggregated. It is attributed by product and trade subchannel by VIP, and it gives us a very, very good insight into what's happening in the wine and spirits industries. We'll also be able to look at some regional data as well as some price tier data that will add insights to our understanding of what's happening in the marketplace. You know, when I first started doing this, I wanted to try and stay away from this being all about COVID. However, it's really not possible. And this truly is an unprecedented time. And what we're going through right now in the category and what we're experiencing with this pandemic and this shelter-in-place directives have completely changed what's going on in the marketplace. So as we look at this, SipSource uses 12-month rolling data. That gives us really good stable trends as to what's going on. And what this shows you is data for the period from December through June and how trends have been moving and what has happened. And you can see at the top there, that green line, that's the spirits trends. Spirits remain very, very strong, and spirits have been strong for quite some time. Wine had been lagging. Now, as I look at that data, there's really nothing in this data that would tell me, other than that time period right there in March, that some sort of an event happened there in March that really uplifted some sales, especially hitting the wine category. We all know what that was in March. But in general, macro trends and what's going on in the category haven't really changed that much. However, it's less about what's happening in the category and much, much more about where it's happening in the category. And you can see this chart, spirits on the left-hand side, wine on the right-hand side. That darker line represents off-premise sales, retail, depletions, and the blue line represents the on-premise category. And you can see what has happened here. And you can see that by the nature of the slope of those lines, how they are almost identical, that whatever happened in spirits also happened in wine. And COVID-19 and the shelter in place, the shutdown of the on-premise establishments clearly had a dramatic impact in what's happening in these trends. So as we try and look towards the future and understand what's happening, this is a data set that comes from an engagement I have with the Wine Market Council. And this is a company called Civic Science, who does polling of consumers across the country. And one of the questions they've been asking during the COVID-19 pandemic is, from now, how soon will you feel comfortable going out to restaurants? And that red line at the top, 53% of all respondents currently say that it's going to be over 4 months before they're comfortable doing that. 37% at this point in time are ready to do it in the next 2 to 3 weeks. However, when we think about this and what this looks like, there is a data set back there that if we look at that late May to mid-June period, you see that what was happening is that people were getting ready, people were getting anxious. We saw a number of states opening up the on-premise and allowing people back. But once we saw the instances of COVID-19 cases begin to increase again, we saw these lines cross back to where they went to even higher levels, where people were hesitant to go out to restaurants. Net of this tells me we're into this for the long term, and that it's going to be a while before this, before the on-premise really does get back to any sense of normal. What does that really mean, though? And when we think about these trends and what's happening, the top bar, the large bar, that represents the percentage of sales, and this is for the wine category. The percent of depletions that are done in the retail side of things, the off-premise. The smaller number down there at the bottom, you can see that that's what on-premise represents in volume. Remember, this is all depletion-based information. You can see all that line from June of 2019 up to February of 2020. It just doesn't move. The split between the on and off-premise is unbelievably stable. However, once we enter into the shelter in place, you can see that continued deterioration of share in the on-premise. As we look forward and we project that out, where the on-premise was accounting for 14.6% of wine depletions, we're anticipating that by the end of the year, this could be below 6%. If we think about that in terms of spirits is a little bit more reliant in the on-premise, where you see that number was hovering around 18.2, 18.3. As we go forward, it now at the end of June has gone all the way down to 14% share. Push that forward all the way to December, and we would anticipate that this would be down to where on-premise is only accounting for 7.5% of the total business. If we think about that and what does that mean and how will that impact the business? If we're used to seeing outlets and going into outlets and seeing back bars that look like this, chances are we'll be looking at a situation where they tend to look a little bit more like this. There's no question that this is going to have an impact on cash flow for on-premise establishments. They're going to have to limit their assortment and really going to have to watch the inventory on the products that they carry. Staying on the on-premise theme, as we look at this, we are looking at this also on a regional basis. And this is the U.S. Census regions that are defined by the West, Midwest, Northeast, and South. Early on in this, when we look at the March and April, which is represented by the red and yellow boxes, it was very even. We saw the impact of this being very, very even on the declines in the on-premise. However, as we moved into May and June, we started to see more variability, and we're seeing that continue on. I would expect to see this go even further. Not all states are going to open up at the same pace. Certainly, the West was very early to shut down a lot of things, with California, Washington, and Oregon being a lion's share of that. Where the Northeast, with New York being shut down as long as it was, had a pretty big impact. We know that the southern United States was early to open up the on-premise channels, and we see that in the trends within this data. Again, I would say that we would anticipate that we would expect to see this become more variable as states open up at different rates in the on-premise and on under different conditions. However, there is a very, very clear offset, and we really do see the inverse relationship between the on and the off. As that on-premise gets hurt, we do see that business shifting into the off-premise and shifting into the retail channels. We will anticipate seeing that as one region, within that region, as the on-premise comes back or gets worse, you'll see that offset on the retail side of things. Would also say that something interesting that we've seen in our data is in the retail side of things for off-premise. The big winner from a sub-channel standpoint has been the liquor channel. And the liquor channel now accounts for almost 40% of all depletions in the wine and spirits categories combined. But you can see that the liquor category has grown 6.7% in share since February in this. Club Wholesale also doing well as people's shopping habits look more for fewer trips and do more stocking up. Initially, convenience stores were very, very slow to react. However, we do think that the shopping habits of people trying to get in and out of establishments quickly with as least amount of human contact as possible, that C-store is actually starting to tick back up. and we're seeing that business in the C-store come back and do better. Not all categories were affected equally. And this is looking at the time period between February, the end of February to the end of June, and what categories have been growing. One of the things that has played a pretty big role in this has been what categories are reliant on on-premise more so than others, because that is not at all equal. In general, sparkling wines have been hurt very badly. The exception to that is Prosecco. Prosecco has been growing very, very strongly. It is the fastest growing varietal, if you will, within the wine category at 7.9%. Sauvignon Blanc is growing at 6.6%. These two varietals have been growing long term. We've seen them doing very, very well. However, Vermouth and Pink Moscato are new entries into the growing side of things. Vermouth really has to do all about the cocktail culture. We've talked about the growing nature of spirits and how spirits are doing very, very well. People are definitely experimenting with home mixology. And the growth in Vermouth, and before this, the Vermouth category was flat to down. We're seeing very, very good growth in Vermouth, and that's all about home bartending and home mixology. On Pink Moscato, I believe this is about the convergence of pink and sweet. Rosé wines have been growing very, very strong, and we know that the American palate, generally speaking, will gravitate towards sweet wines when given the choice, a little bit sweeter taste profile. On the bottom side of this, really, other than Cava, these are categories that have been in decline for quite some time. But as I said earlier, on-premise is very, very important to the sparkling wine category, and we're seeing sparkling wine take a bit of a hit during this. On the spirit side of things, pre-mixed cocktails have exploded. It is amazing to see what has happened with this, and the gain in trend that we have seen on premixed cocktails is phenomenal. That 28.4% is by far, you can see, the leading growth engine within the spirits category as people look to replace that cocktail that they were having out. I will say that premixed cocktails, cognac, U.S. straight whiskey, and tequila, those four items have been growing long term. They have been in the top four for quite some period of time, but the order has changed with pre-mixed cocktails moving to the top, cognac gaining strength. I'm actually a bit surprised by tequila's performance. Tequila is very reliant on the on-premise, but it's clear to me that people are taking that tequila experience home as the retail sales for tequila have really largely offset the losses in the on-premise. On the bottom side here, we see single malt scotch, gin, blended scotch, and Irish whiskey getting hurt the worst in this. Certainly with the scotch and Irish category, they're facing the double whammy of COVID-19 as well as additional tariffs. This is looking at the data by price tier, and what we've done here for the wine category is look at this from the lowest price category on the left to the highest price on the right with the various varietals in there. The point of this really isn't about pointing out the different varietals, but it's to talk about a question that we get asked a lot, and that question is around premiumization. Premiumization has been a very big driver for the beverage alcohol category in general for many, many years and contributes greatly. The question around is premiumization continuing within the shelter in place and during COVID-19 is really muddy. It's very, very hard to speak to this. And in cutting the data a couple of different ways, it would appear to me as though on the wine side of things, it's not happening as much as it was, that it seems to have probably set back just a little bit. We can see over there on the left-hand side in that value side, we're seeing some growth in some categories that are pretty strong. And this is 12-month ending data June, so it gives us a good broad look at this. But we also do see along there, as you go over to the luxury side and certainly the super premium side, that there is some growth happening in those areas. However, if I look at the trend difference between where they were in February and where they were ending June, we definitely see over there on the left-hand side of that, on those lower priced items, that the lower priced items are gaining momentum, where the luxury items are not. The super premium category still actually fairly well split, but some very good growth coming from that area, and the premium segments fairly split. So when I think about this from a wine standpoint, it would appear to me as though premiumization is not happening to the level that it was before the pandemic. Moving on to spirits, when we look at this, on that bottom left-hand side, you can see that the lowest priced spirits, all of them are in decline. A lot of that has to be driven by on-premise wells, and the fact that those just aren't happening like they were. They're in many places just not happening at all. You see good growth in the premium and the super premium, and then kind of a mixed bag over there on the ultra premium. So when I think about spirits, I do believe that there is still a premiumization is happening more so than it is in the wine category. But in general, it's a pretty muddy equation to understand really what's happening exactly as people move occasions from on-premise into the in-home usage and other non-restaurant occasions. Same thing here as we look at that. You can see the momentum and what the momentum is changing there. The momentum on the spirit side, really very strong in those middle two categories. Where the popular is down, ultra premium also losing momentum. So again, what I would say, it feels as though it's a muddy question to answer. To wrap this up, in general, first and foremost, category volume largely remains unchanged. It's a channel shift. Spirits continue to do well. Wine has gained a little bit, but in general, it would appear that the wine and spirits consumer really hasn't changed too much on how much they're consuming. The on-premise landscape will be changed for the long term. There's going to be fewer outlets. We know that they're going to shrink. We're already seeing that happen. We also believe that there's going to be much, much tighter assortments. So the opportunities and just the pure number of slots available for products is going to decline a fair bit. How consumers have shopped, how they do shop at retail has also changed. And when we look at this, the consumer is really making fewer trips. They're focused on speed and focused on the least amount of human contact possible. Liquor channel is winning in that occasion as we go forward, and I believe that that will continue certainly in the short term. Right now, on premiumization, it's a very, very difficult thing to read. We just spoke about that. Looks like it's less so on the wine side, probably doing okay on the spirit side. With that, thank you very much for your time, and I will turn it over to Jake.
All right, thanks, Dale. Really interesting. Lots of questions, but I'm gonna hold those until Jake presents. We're gonna hand it off to Jake. If you could share with us, Jake, your insights at the wholesale and regulatory level, and then we'll circle back for some Q&A. And in the meantime, if you have any questions that you want to ask of the audience of the presenters, please feel free to use the chat function and enter your questions. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll answer them as we can.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Jake Eggman with Wine and Spirits Wholesalers. I'm on the East Coast in the DC area, and I'm here today to talk, really to give a little bit more, maybe 30,000 foot look at a lot of the themes that Dale just covered. WSWA represents the wholesale tier of the wine and spirits industry. Our members are in every state in the country in some capacity and distribute around 80% of the wine and spirits that goes into the retail marketplace. So we try and keep the best pulse we can on the industry, and certainly this has been an exciting and obviously challenging year to work through. Today, we'll quickly walk through some of the legal and policy issues predating COVID that are out there. If you were at this event last year, we talked about a couple of them. We've got some updates on a few big ones, what we're seeing in the retail landscape, some of the developments within the industry, and certainly the impact that COVID has had on all of this. So starting with perhaps the driest part of this, but certainly an important piece, we have to look at the framework that the beverage alcohol industry is operating in. And, There's a lot of change afoot. Certainly COVID is driving a lot of that. But in the last 18 months, one of the main items that the industry has looked at has been a Supreme Court case that impacted beverage alcohol. Last year at this event, we were talking about its pending opinion that came out last June. It was the Tennessee Wine and Spirits Retailers case, and it dealt with the ability of a state, in this case Tennessee, to restrict eligibility for retail alcohol licenses. And in that case, without going into the gory details, the Supreme Court found that there's indeed a limit to the state's authority to impose limits on interstate businesses like that. And one of the things that case really rekindled was challenges to laws addressing interstate retail shipment of wine. And as a result, there are currently 8. Some of these predated the Tennessee case, but there are now 8 cases around the country examining the ability of states to regulate that interstate movement of retail wine. So that's obviously kind of if you recall, the Granholm case with winery direct shipping back in 2005. This is in many ways, these cases represent the next iteration of that. So certainly a big factor when thinking about the e-commerce channel today when we think of the shipping side of that. Dale alluded to it, but federally, a very large topic for those in the import and wholesale business has been tariffs with the Airbus-Boeing dispute. The 25% tariff on a variety of European spirits and wine products is a very big deal to the industry. It was just continued, I believe, early this week, I should say last week, and will continue in place for those products through early next year at a minimum. So that's a significant hit for a variety of European beverage alcohol products. But as is often the case in the alcohol world, a lot of the policy changes that we're really following closely are at the state level. And I think a lot of these are really exciting right now, and they go right into the consumer convenience and consumer need in light of COVID related to e-commerce and new delivery solutions. One of the primary trends we've been following and really advocating for is the ability for licensed retail delivery, retailers to be able to complete delivery to consumers or use third parties to do that. And at this point, our count has 32 states that allow retailers to make that delivery themselves, and about 24 states that allow a third party like Instacart or others to conduct that activity. A great way to connect consumers to those products. And as Dale said, those seeking to minimize time in store, this couldn't be a better way to do that. Similarly, and this predated COVID and has been greatly accelerated by it, has been state policies looking at the on-premise and delivery privileges there. Certainly, we've seen lots of temporary orders allowing to-go mixed beverages and sealed containers of beer, wine, and in some cases spirits. But there are at least 3 states that I followed this year and in 2019 and 2020, Texas, Iowa, Oklahoma, that have all enacted some form of permanent to-go on-premise delivery privileges for allowing food and beverage alcohol to be delivered to the consumer in one shot. And many more states have that in some form of temporary fashion, and I would expect to see that trend grow, to see more of those become permanent. And I'll call out one state of note here as well. Kentucky this year did enact legislation that enables wine, spirits, and beer manufacturers, both inside and outside the state, to obtain a direct-to-consumer shipping license. And so that brings, I believe, the count to 45 states now that allow direct-to-consumer wine shipping, but it joins a much smaller group of states for which spirits direct shipping is allowed. They're still working through the rules there, but that new law is on the books, and I think people will be eligible to apply for licensure very shortly. Pivoting away from the policy space, I stole this slide, or borrowed the slide, I guess, from our friends at the National Beer Wholesalers. But I think this follows on nicely with some of what Dale was mentioning a moment ago. Just thinking about the retail marketplace, the customers for wholesalers, the long-term trend has been, in terms of numbers, not one of great growth. And so this, combined with the the sort of the consumption pie, if you will, looking at NIAAA data for the last decade, overall per capita alcohol consumption, is relatively flat. It just means that the marketplace requires industry members to be thinking about innovative ways to ensure their place in that place when the market isn't growing at great rate. So I say that just to sort of set the stage for the context that we're all facing when we think about retail, working in the retail space and reaching consumers. And so within that space, what are some of the things that we've been thinking about? I think the first point that's been of real excitement for me to watch grow has been the rise in new wholesalers. Certainly, there are many long-standing multi-state wholesalers, single-state wholesalers that have been servicing the market for decades. But we've seen a steady growth in small wholesalers, often working in very, I'll call them niche categories. And we really feel great about this, being able to bring attention to products that are new to the market and are getting finding a new home in the space. So we've been watching this year-over-year growth, and I feel comfortable saying it's really a firm trend now over the last 4 to 5 years of new wine and spirits wholesalers in the industry. Similarly, and this is no surprise, but we're very closely watching the role of technology at all levels. Thinking about connecting consumers to retailers and the shopping experience we have. There's so many channels today that can occur through. But I, was just browsing the Drizzly app earlier today and looking in Washington, D.C. and was looking at 550 Cabernets that were available for 1 hour delivery. And I think about that somewhat infinite shelf for almost immediate delivery and think about how different that is today than just several years ago. And similarly, the technology role for connecting retailers to wholesalers, whether that be innovations in wholesaling. Last year at this panel, I sat next to Cheryl Dersey from LibDib. LibDib, who works with RNDC at the national level, is really helping pair suppliers through the 3-tier system to retailers when they're new to the marketplace and might not fit other distribution models. And there are a variety of tools today that are and businesses that are making those connections happen, and they're all really exciting, and I think really helping the industry as a whole. And part and parcel with that, certainly data, and I won't try and replicate what Dale just spoke to, but SipSource is one example. We're able to drill ever more detailed holes, if you will, and understand what's happening, and as a result, industry members at all 3 tiers, I think, are able to make better and better decisions in their own businesses. And last, I find this endlessly fascinating, but innovation certainly has not ceased, whether that be in packaging, in the can sector, or otherwise. Dale just talked about RTDs, the explosive growth of RTDs, both, and certainly the rise of spirits-based RTDs entering multiple channels, and the packaging that those come in. And it continues to be an exciting space to be in, watching new ways to see the beverage alcohol industry flourish. So those were a couple of the big topics, just at a high level, that we're looking at and interested in and working on. But I wanted to quickly wrap on just a few of the big themes from COVID. As Dale spoke to, clearly major changes in consumer habits, and we really think nonstop about our on-premise partners, and it's a very, very challenging time to be in the on-premise. So certainly the delivery elements that I was just speaking to are one way in which on-premise can help connect them, can stay connected with consumers. But the related rise in off-premise business, and again, looking at ways that e-commerce and delivery are able to fulfill consumer demand for that near contactless, limited interaction. Those are some of the big factors that are in our thoughts. And lastly, throughout underlying all of this really is this sort of notion that we're in an e-premise or fourth type channel time. Whether it's that drizzly scenario I just described, or a retailer looking through the e-commerce portal of a wholesaler, we're finding more and more ways to interact between the tiers. And for us, that technology tool is going to become ever more important. And a lot of our thought goes into how that will take hold over the coming years. So certainly we are very understanding of the situation today, and trying to look for those solutions going forward. And with that, thank you for having me here today.
Thanks to both of you. Hugely valuable and insightful information, and starts to raise a number of questions about what the next 6 to 12 months is going to look like in this continued environment. Certainly some opportunities and exciting changes, as well as some challenges ahead. Dale, this is probably for you around consumer segments, and what categories, age demographics, or occasions we need to be thinking about, both from a wine and spirit standpoint, given the possibility of economic downturn, and in terms of preparation for really teeing our portfolios up to sell and promote our products to the right needs of a changing economy.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Great question. And I do think you have to take a step back and look at this and say that on some level, everybody has been impacted in one way or another on what they're doing. But we've definitely seen with the shelter-in-place closing of the on-premise, the usage in-home has accelerated greatly. And I do think that the occasions that are happening with that are around mealtime, as now people are having to cook more, whether they like it or not. So they're preparing food, they're having that extra glass of wine. You think about the cut down on commute time that people are having here. And in some ways, you're getting an extra X number of hours back in the day. But we also know that there's a lot of people out there that are having to wear the hat of teacher now and having to wear other hats that they didn't have to wear before. So I think that the broad-based answer would be nobody's not affected. But I do think that in the alcoholic beverage category, when we think about what that's going to look like going forward, I believe that there will probably be higher usage in home on the long term. And that a bit of a return back to that meal at home. And if you can structure your brands around that and move towards that, if it fits, that probably isn't a bad place to go.
Great. Thanks so much, Dale. This next question is around the blurring of supplier types. Traditionally, wine suppliers have provided products into the market that are exclusively wine. In recent years, we've seen more blurring of those lines. Can you tell me, Jake, do you have a sense of the number of trademark registrations that are coming, and what categories they're coming around, and from what kinds of suppliers? So are there more RTDs coming from wine suppliers, more spirits coming from wine suppliers? How much are those lines starting to blur?
So Dale can probably talk more about the volumes that are being seen, but one thing we do know is TTB has had a steady growth in label approvals in all categories, and certainly a trip to the different retailers today will evidence this. There's from a consumer standpoint, the rise of spirits-based RTDs seems to be a very significant recent phenomenon, and also thinking about the different regulatory classifications around the country, control states, and the availability of whether spirits products are available in grocery and C-store impacts those choices. But I think there's growth all around. But let me turn it to Dale to see if there's insight into what's in the can.
Yeah, and I think that it's a really interesting question, and I think that's really where it starts. And this is the first presentation I've given in a long time where I didn't go off on a tangent on hard seltzer, so now's the right time. And when you think about that, that's a category that is also seeing a lot of change and is bringing about a lot of new products. And it's very hard to even see a day go by when you don't get a new entry of some sort into that category, be it malt-based, spirit-based, or wine-based. And I would say by and large, on a consumer front, they're less concerned about what the base is and more concerned about what the consumer proposition is. Now, so that category is going to continue to explode, and I think you will see it across all forms. I do think on, Laura, to your question on where are people going, and I would say from a producer standpoint, and I think we've seen much more of the wine producers getting into the spirit side of things. And if you look at this, the wine category had a long run of really good growth, but that growth has slowed, and we're seeing the spirits category really accelerate in growth. And now you open up this window that is a little bit easier to get into, which is a pre-mixed beverage. And you can do it in a can, and that category is extremely hot. So that's a pretty light jump for some of these producers. It does have an impact, I think, on the wholesale side, because if you think about malt-based products, that's really one distributor network. Wine and spirits is another distributor network. And some of those products are really blurring that line on where they go. So it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out and where a lot of those producers choose to go. Do they go with the beer networks or do they go with the wine and spirit networks?
Great, thanks. Jake, this question is, I think, for you primarily around the new regulations and policies related to consumer direct delivery vehicles, and how a small supplier goes about finding information around what they can and can't do, knowing that this universe is being shaped and the rules around it are in flux and evolving.
Yeah, so now the majority of states have delivery, and when we talk at WSWA about delivery, we're thinking about connecting a retailer off-premise, generally, well, as we talked about it, possibly an on-premise now, but generally an off-premise retailer with a consumer for same-day delivery. I went on the app and I ordered the product, and my local retailer delivered it to me. As a consumer, it's as simple as downloading apps today and looking at what's out there. But from the other side, I think it really starts with getting to know your home markets. Your state regulators are going to be the first and foremost authority on what you can and can't do. But as a general rule today, delivery is becoming more common than not. And when you think about it, the 45. I hope I'm getting my number right, 45 states with direct-to-consumer wine shipping via common carrier interstate. We're at a number not that far away where those products that are already in the recipient state are able to be fulfilled almost immediately. So I would encourage folks to talk to their regulator, or if you're investigating new markets, talking to the regulatory authorities there.
Great. Hey, we want to thank once again Jake and Dale for a great presentation. As always, continue to submit your questions in the chat box. We won't be able to answer all of them, but there will be some follow-up resources, answer questions that we're not able to answer today. We're going to take a quick break and come back with the COVID-19 impact on managing trade and media relations, changes that are here to stay. We'll begin at 10 o'clock. Thanks.